Somebody asked me once about the difference between art and entertainment. And, I thought about it, and I ended up saying that I think entertainment kind of comes to you where you are. It meets you where you are. You can be very passive as a viewer or a listener in engaging with it, which is not a value judgment of it. It's just, I think that's the way it tends to operate. With art, I think you have to do more work, and you have to meet it halfway. And sometimes you have to go really, more than halfway to meet it, depending on the work. And I think this is a piece that everybody kind of has their own experience or could have their own experience with this piece. I think that's part of it, right? You have to, as an audience, you have to meet this piece halfway and engage with it kind of on its terms and let it tell you what it's got to tell you. It's not, I think partially because there's not a story, it's not necessarily a piece that's gonna come to you. Black Lodge began with a pretty simple question, which was, did William Burroughs, Antonin Artaud, and David Lynch influence one another's work in some way? I had known all of their work and I saw commonalities, and so I was just curious. Was there something, not quite collaborative, but was there influence between them? That question led to more questions, which led to more questions, which eventually became Black Lodge. So Black Lodge as a piece is very circular. It's structured as a cycle. It's based on the stages of the bardo. The beginning of the piece is the end of the piece. It's a character kind of trapped in a loop looking for a kind of escape. Doctors! Bardo is a concept that comes from Buddhism, and it's essentially a space between death and rebirth. There are several stages to the bardo, and those stages form the structure of the score. So if you look at the score, you can see the different realms that the spirit goes through on the sort of path to rebirth, and we work through the whole thing in Black Lodge, and then start them all again. So one of the challenges when you're making an opera that doesn't have a story is how you stage it. The original plan was that it was going to be an installation opera where the audience would wear silent disco headphones and would travel along their own kind of journey in a space. And when the pandemic happened, we all said, well, no one's ever going to that show. So let's rethink it. And we realized, because Michael Joseph McQuilken had been brought on at that point to direct, he's also a filmmaker. So we said, well, maybe it's a film. Maybe we make it as a film. And that's what it ended up becoming, is this sort of film hybrid performance piece. And so what Michael Joseph McQuilken did is fashioned a screenplay, which was really drawn out of the layers of meaning and of narrative that were already in the opera through Anne Waldman's libretto and through the score and through the structure of the bardo. And so the narrative that he came up with is inspired by a horrific story of William Burroughs shooting his wife, playing William Tell. Looking at that as an action or a dramatic gesture places this character, who's in the film is just known as the Man, into this kind of hellish loop where he's continuously forced to relive the most horrible thing that he's ever done. The structure of the film is based around his attempt to escape having to acknowledge this, to escape the sort of anguish of guilt and regret that this character is experiencing. So kind of in a bardo sense, trying to escape the demons of his own making and move to a next place. So it's pretty intense, and it's, Michael's idea was that the narrative would be connected to the sort of Burroughs mythology. The visual world would come from, in terms of design, would come from the sort of Lynchian kind of classic 50s kind of energy. And then the idea of theatrical apparatus, kind of that we see all of the lights, we see all of the mechanics of theater, that comes from Artaud. So he was still channeling these three initial inspirations in his very creative interpretation of the work. And so as an audience, you have to sort of go to it, I think, not necessarily looking to be told a story, but to go on a journey and find a story or experience the journey as a story yourself. In that sense, it's fairly different than the other operas that I've written, which are telling a very specific story. This is more experiential, it's more abstract, it's more poetic, I think, in certain ways, not just because I collaborated with Anne Waldman, who is a poet, but just the whole conceit of it has a sort of poetic objective, I think, or poetic goal. Every piece of art can mean something, and I think should mean something very different to every audience member, but this piece especially is kind of wide open in that way.